Hey there, fellow travelers. Welcome to the Tolkien Road, episode 350. In this episode, we're continuing our journey through the Fall of Númenor by exploring Sauron's full-scale invasion of Eriador and the subsequent counterattack of the Númenoreans. Before we get started, I just want to give a double up air five to our amazing fellowship. Stick 'em up, fellowship. 3, 2, 1. Whoopsh. Boom. Very nice. Special thanks to this episode's executive producers, John R., Kaitlyn of Tea with Tolkien, Jacob Lockham, John H., Melkor27, and KG. Also, a shout out to those celebrating their fellowship anniversary in September or October of 2023. Catherine, Tom S., Sherry R., Stephanie B., John W., Alan C., Dustin Q., Robert S., Melkor27, Eugene D., James L., Ken P., Samuel B., Red Hawk, and Alex S. Thank you all so much for sticking with us over the years. Join the Fellowship of the Road by visiting patreon.com/TolkienRoad. When you join the Fellowship of the Road, it helps us to keep on evering on and land you some cool perks along the way. Learn more at patreon.com/TolkienRoad. If you're watching, hit that like button. Don't forget to subscribe and let us know what's on your mind in the comments below. Finally, attention binge listeners. You know who you are. Subscribe, rate, and review us on iTunes or the platform of your choice. If you are a 5-star fan of the Tolkien Road, you can really help us out by heading over to iTunes or your preferred source for the show and dropping us a rating and review. When you do that, it helps us to get the word out about the Tolkien Road, which helps us to keep on evering on. All right. So when we left off, things were looking pretty dire for the Elves of Eriador against the army of Sauron. In this chapter, we'll continue our exploration of Sauron's war against the elves, or the War of the Three Rings, as I also refer to it. The chapters we'll be looking at are 1699, Sauron overruns Eriador, and 1700, Tar-Minastir sends a great navy from Númenor to Lindon, Sauron is defeated. I guess a little spoiler alert may have been in order there, but it's not that hard to figure out. It's right there in the chapter title. The original sources for these chapters are primarily Lord of the Rings and Unfinished Tales. So, as we are accustomed to beginning each of these episodes, let's talk about the ruler of Númenor at this juncture. It's still Tar-Telperion, the second ruling queen of Númenor. She will reign until Second Age 1731. But there's kind of a funny little deal here with this chapter that we need to mention. So, as we saw in the title of 1700, there's Tar-Minastir sends a great navy from Númenor to Lindon. But Tar-Telperion was the ruler, was the Tar, right, of Númenor until 1731. So how is there another Tar in the year 1700? Well, Tar-Minastir will be the ruler, the king of Númenor after Tar-Telperion. We'll talk more about how that comes about in the next episode. But this is still kind of an odd little point, and I wanted to go ahead and address the fact that we have apparently 2 Tars at this time, and what's going on there. So here is what it says in the footnote of the Fall of Númenor for the chapter 1700 here. Although the date of Second Age 1700 given for this intervention by Tar-Minastir is clearly established in the Legendarium, it is at variance with the dates given by the reign of his aunt, Queen Tar-Telperion, which ended in 1731. Christopher Tolkien in Unfinished Tales wrote, "I cannot in any way account for this discrepancy. It has been suggested that, at the time, Minastir might have been acting on behalf of Queen Tar-Telperion, either as regent or possibly as designated captain of the Queen's or the King's ships. His being given the title king in accounts of the sending of the Númenorian fleet to aid the elves against Sauron might therefore be a case of the chronicler retrospectively acknowledging Minastir's later kingship, even though at that point he had not taken up the scepter." So, I don't make too much of this. I don't think this is like, I don't think this is maybe even a mistake. I think it's possibly just, if looking back historically, that someone is going to be the king at some point, why not just go ahead and call them by that so you know who we're talking about? It's clear when you kind of dive into the details that Minastir was not actually the king at this time. but he may have even been the heir apparent. As we'll find out with Tar-Minastir, she does not have any offspring, so at this point, she may have just been of the mind of, hey, things are getting kind of crazy over there in Middle Earth, so I'm going to go ahead and say you're my heir, and I want you to lead our forces overseas, so that it can be clear that you come with my full support and blessing. We can read into it all kinds of different ways. I don't make too big a deal out of it. I think it's even just the simplest explanation offered here of kind of a retrospective using of that title for him, even when he wasn't king yet. That's fine too. I don't have a whole lot of issue with that. It's kind of like saying like future first president George Washington, led the colonial forces, in the Revolutionary War or something along those lines, right? So there you go. That's what I make of that. All right. Well, let's recap on the last episode in particular, because this was the beginning of the War of the Three Rings. That episode covered the years 1693 through 1697, with Sauron attacking Eregion and Halin. I'm going to share our map here just so we can be clear on the regions we're talking about. Zoom in a little bit for everybody. Let's see. That zoom did not work. Here we go. All right. So got my little drawer here too. Let's see if I can move that around. I don't think it's obscuring us too much, but so let's see. Move this over here. There we go. Okay. So Sauron brings his forces from Mordor across the Anduin. He does not bother attacking Lorien, at that time known as Lorienand. He goes through the gap, what will later be known as the Gap of Rohan, and comes up to attack Eregion here. We talked a little bit about why he would have chosen that route instead of maybe going right into the heart of Eriador last time. But he has pretty good success. There is some, some attack back from Eregion, but Sauron does overrun the city with his forces. There's Eregion right there. And he does suffer a counterattack from the dwarves from Moria, but ultimately he is able to defeat Celebrimbor and ultimately kill Celebrimbor. Sauron takes the forces, the remaining elves of Eregion, and retreats to this area and establishes Rivendell at the what do you call this? It's the source of the Bruinen, right? The Bruinen River. So, kind of in the foothills of the Misty Mountains. So, that's where we left off. Those are kind of the big high points that happened in the last episode. So, at this point, things are looking pretty dire for the peoples of Eriador. This whole region, it looks like they might have free reign. What's the only thing standing in their way? Well, it's probably the elves of Gil-galad at the Grey Havens. But they have, of course, sent some of their forces, some of what they had to Eregion to aid in the battle there. Elrond had come leading the forces that were sent from Gil-galad there, and he retreats to this area of Rivendell, establishes a stronghold there. Sauron does not attack there, but he's like, okay, now is my chance to go for the direct attack on the Grey Havens. So Sauron wants to drive further into Eriador toward Lindon. His aim is to obtain the three rings. He suspects at least one is there. And all the while, elves and men are gathering to Elrond at Imladris. This serves to weaken Sauron's main attacking force since he has to be on guard against Elrond. So you can kind of think of it this way, right? Even though he chooses not to go for, not to pursue Elrond further up this way, if you think about it, like, if this is Sauron's main thrust, his main attack, right? And remember, the Shire doesn't exist at this point, right? The Shire, Hobbiton, none of this exists in the Legendarium. There aren't even hobbits here at this time. So there are other inhabitants of these regions, surely, but it's not like he's just like Sauron's forces are overrunning the Shire at this point. The Shire does not exist as we know it in the later Third Age. But this is kind of the thrust. We might say like Sauron, they come over, their forces come over here. They cross at the Tharbad. Sauron's taking all these different areas as he goes, but his main thrust is to get to the Grey Havens and eventually overrun this area right here. But of course, Gil-galad, they put up kind of a last stand there, really using the River Lune here, this river right here, as their last line of defense before Lindon would be overrun. And that, of course, because the main thrust of the attack for Sauron is towards Lindon, that does open up his forces to kind of pestering attacks from Rivendell. We see here this is kind of their side and their kind of side and rear is perhaps exposed. So there's a little bit of an annoyance factor coming from Elrond right here in Rivendell. And as it says, it serves to weaken Sauron's main attacking force since he has to be on guard against Elrond. All right, so that's where things stand in 1699, 2 years after the death of Celebrimbor. Things are looking not so good for the elves, the remaining elves of Eriador, the elves and men of Eriador, and that is where things stand. So we'll pause there for a moment and consider what is also in this chapter regarding the dwarves. It says, as a result, not only did the great city of Khazad-dûm become a dwelling for the orcs of Sauron, but the eager delving of the dwarves had aroused a Balrog. All right, and I won't read the rest of that little passage right there, but what I want to say here is this is kind of an anachronism. I don't completely understand why this was included in this chapter. Moria was still held by the dwarves during this time, and it wasn't until Third Age 1980, which is like 3,000 years later, that the Balrog Doran's Bane attacked. So I'm not entirely sure why this was thrown in here. I think Moria, perhaps the dwarves, after taking their own losses, they choose. They had been friends with the elves of Eregion, but perhaps at this time with Eregion gone, they feel somewhat hemmed in. Perhaps they're waiting, strengthening themselves in case assuming that Gil-galad might fall, and they want to be able to hold out against the elves, the forces of Sauron, should they come back for them. But I don't really see any actual indication that Moria was actually overrun by orcs at this time. So I'm not entirely sure where that comes from. Now, I could be wrong. If I'm wrong, please point me to where I'm wrong. But I couldn't find anything as I examined this and the Legendarium that said that Moria was actually overrun by orcs, in the year 1700 or 1699 of the Second Age. I don't think that any of that really happened until much later in the Third Age. Again, could be wrong. Please point me to to the reference if I am. But I did want to, just briefly acknowledge the greatness of Tolkien's poetry, and just read maybe the last couple of stanzas here, that kind of give a sense of the majesty of Moria. So I'll go for it. And this is referring to Durin. A king he was on carven throne in many-pillared halls of stone, with golden roof and silver floor, and runes of power upon the door. The light of sun and star and moon, and shining lamps of crystal hewn, undimmed by cloud or shade of night, there shone forever fair and bright. There hammer on the anvil smote, there chisel clove and graver wrote, there forged was blade and bound was hilt, the delver mind the mason built. There beryl, pearl, and opal pale, and metal wrought like fish's mail. Buckler and corselet, axe and sword, and shining spears were laid in hoard. Unwearied there were Durin's folk, beneath the mountains music woke. The harpers harped, the minstrels sang, and at the gates the trumpets rang. The world is grey, the mountains old, the forge's fire is ashen cold. No harp is rung, no hammer falls, The darkness dwells in Durin's halls. The shadow lies upon his tomb in Moria and Khazad-dûm, but still the sunken stars appear in dark and windless Miromir. There lies his crown in water deep till Durin wakes again from sleep. So this is, of course, again, would be a perspective looking back much later in history, in the history of Middle-earth. But I do like the images we get of maybe what Moria was like in its prime. Pretty cool images, in my opinion. All right. So, jumping to 1700, to the next year. Tar-Minastir's navy reaches Middle-earth. So this is another one we're going to want to use the map for. Get that done here. Let me clear the map off. All right. So, Sauron's main force does reach the River Lune with more forces en route. So, Sauron has driven into the banks of the River Lune here, and this, of course, serves as a nice natural strategic barrier. But nevertheless, they will find a way to overrun it if Gil-galad's forces fail. But thankfully, Gil-galad and some Númenorians were holding the Lune in desperate defense of the Grey Havens, and Tar-Minastir arrives in the nick of time. Now, it actually says in the chapter that Gil-galad had contacted Númenor around 1695 saying, hey, we need help. So, this is 5 years after his request for help. Of course, sea travel can take a long time. Mustering all of the forces that you're going to need can take a long time. But Tar-Minastir arrives in the nick of time, and Sauron's force is defeated at the Grey Havens and driven back. And then some of the Númenorian forces make a landing at Land Daer at the mouth of the Gwathlo Grey Flood. So this would be this region down here. So we can kind of think of like the main Númenorian force, comes up through here to reinforce the Grey Havens, and then they push Sauron's force back, right? Sauron's forces are in retreat because of the Númenorian force that attacks here. And what happens is we actually get a big clash here at Tharbad, which is the crossing of the Grey Flood, because another Númenorian force lands here. So kind of an interesting battle plan, right? Their goal, drive them back and the main thrust, and then as they're retreating, we attack them on their flank, right? We attack them on their flank and in the rear, and we take even more of them out so that they're not able to actually retreat to, some part of Eriador and hold some portion of it going forward. And it actually says that the Battle of the Gwathlo at Tharbad, Sauron's forces are utterly routed, and he only narrowly escapes. So, thankfully, the landing of the Númenorians is in the nick of time, and their battle plan succeeds in not only driving Sauron's forces back from the Grey Havens, but also defeating his forces at the Battle of Tharbad. Again, just to give you a picture of where Tharbad is here. So Tharbad is here, this crossing of the Grey Flood, which is part of this north-south road. So, you kind of think of this as like they were right here, ready to attack, and then this overwhelming force just pushed them all the way back. And once again, Eriador is starting to be freed. So, good news for the free peoples of Middle-earth for sure. All right, so that's really the substance of these particular chapters. Let's take a look at the pencil sketches that are a part of these chapters. Let me pull that up. All right. So the first image we have here is, I would say, is Mordor versus Eriador. So this would be probably an image of a battle taking place in Eriador, perhaps a skirmish at the River Lune in the Grey Havens. I think that's what we see here. The next image is this would be the Númenorian landing. Now, whether this is at the Grey Havens or this is at Land Daer, I'm not particularly certain, but definitely a landing of the Númenorians here to open the chapter that's about. And then we have Sauron's narrow escape at the end of the 1700 chapter. So we can see Sauron is kind of almost on his own. There's only a few maybe of his people. I'm not sure if that's someone in pursuit or if that's some of his orcs, maybe his main guard. And they are quickly retreating, knowing that they have pretty much lost. So Sauron did not count perhaps on the Númenorians coming all the way with a reinforcements from Númenor for this, and as a result, he loses almost his whole army and is forced to escape and to flee. All right, so what are the key takeaways from this chapter? Well, Númenor to the rescue is one. Númenor to the rescue. We see that what was once a very peaceful nation that didn't really have anything to do with the affairs of Middle Earth has 1,700 years into its history become a very powerful nation capable of taking on the forces of Mordor in full. And then we have Imladris and Rivendell established because of the fall of Eregion and Hollin. So pretty big deal there. Rivendell, of course, a important place, throughout the rest of the history of Middle Earth. So we have that. And then next time we'll look at the end of the War of the Three Rings and the consequences of the war for various parties. So next chapter will bring the end of the war, and we will see what happens as a result of the end of this particular war. All right. As always, keep the correspondence coming. We'll do our best to respond to you somehow and at some point. And actually, I am going to spend a little time responding to a recent comment, one comment I particularly enjoyed on episode 348. It was a YouTube comment on October 2nd. This was our Sauron Forges the One Ring episode, and this is from Zephyr Optional. Zephyr Optional says, Sauron has the admin access to the Internet of Rings that he uses a backdoor master program to infiltrate into. The elves are much better programmers than humans and dwarves, and were able to perceive this and made a portion of that Internet of Rings that could still be free from Sauron's manipulation. Love this. I can imagine Tolkien's perspective on current modern technology would be fascinating and critical. Tolkien didn't use recent history as allegory, but recent history is allegory to Tolkien's writings. Yeah, I mean, exactly. We never want to kind of fall into the notion that, Tolkien was like creating an allegory with the rings, but it's the applicability, right? I think we can make cases we can make a lot of different cases for like how the three rings, like the idea of the ring scheme, Sauron's ring scheme, applies in a lot of different ways to various events throughout history, maybe even things in our personal lives, right? But that's the point, is like, it's not necessarily an allegory of one other thing, right? It's not like this symbolizes this. It's that it's applicable because it's such a powerful sort of picture of the way these power schemes tend to work, right? And how technology can often work. Technology can seem like such a good and helpful thing, and honestly, ideally it should be, but it doesn't always work that way because of technology is beholden to whoever is the master of it, right? So, and it's funny because obviously, we know that the only true antidote to the ring scheme is the destruction of the One Ring. It's not like the right person can wield it necessarily. And so it's interesting kind of to think about that in the terms of the internet, because, I've talked about on this show before, as much as I'm doing this on the internet, I'm sharing my thoughts here because of the internet with all of you. I think, a lot of us have probably thought to ourselves over the last, couple of decades, as the internet has become just this thing that took over our lives. Was it worth it? Was it really worth it? I was just having this conversation with my daughter, maybe a week ago. She is in college, in a faraway place, and she didn't have a cell phone for a little while because of some issues with the cell phone company no longer covering the area she was in. So we had to find a new cell phone provider for her. And when she was going through it, I was like, hey, enjoy and make the most of your digital fast. And then once we finally got her back up on her cell phone, we were talking to her, and she was just remarking how great it was actually to be without a cell phone for so long. And I was kind of like, yep, it's cell phones are nice as tools, but in the way they kind of take over our lives, you sometimes do wonder, is it really better this way? Is it really better this way? If you kind of weigh all the pros and the cons of it all, is it really better this way? I won't answer that question. I won't try to. Obviously, again, I'm doing this on the internet, but I think it's a really sort of fascinating philosophical question, and maybe one that we all need to maybe from time to time take our own digital fasts. I've done that a few times myself, and I always find it very, very rewarding when I do. Well, thank you for your comments, Zephyr Optional. Truly appreciate you and all those who choose to comment and correspond. Trying to get a little bit better more frequently about responding to maybe 1 or 2 comments per episode, 1 or 2 notes going forward. So thank you very much, and keep them coming. All right. Hey, don't forget to stop by TrueMythsPress.com for great merch like super styling and comfy Tolkien Road t-shirts, 2 Trees camper mugs, and signed copies of my books. Once again, that's TrueMythsPress.com. Thanks for supporting our work with your purchase. All right. Thank you to our amazing patrons, especially the following: John R., Kaitlyn of Tea with Tolkien, Jacob Lockham, John H., Melkor27, KG, Emilio P., Jonathan D., Robert H., Paul D., Julia, Werty, JoeBagelMan, Richard K., Matt R., Matthew W., John W., Eugene D., Chris B., Daniel S., Seb M., Corey C., Carolyn S., Emil K., Ms. Anonymous, Andrew T., Red Hawk, Shannon S., Brian O., Zeke F., James L., Chris L., Aja V., Ish of the Hammer, Teresa C., David of Pints with Jack, Eric B., and Alaskan Moose 31. Thank you all so much. Truly appreciate our patrons and all of your support. And thank you so much to everybody for watching and or listening. We will talk at you next time. Bye-bye.